pretty, I mean, there's lab tests you can do, which will give you a really accurate number on a graph. They're a little bit less specific because you're often sitting on a stationary bike or running on a treadmill. But you can really do a really nice field test when it comes to looking at heart rate especially, but also your functional power on the bike or your running pace. So we've got the bike heart rate threshold, run heart rate threshold, and then your bike functional power, or FTP as it's sometimes called, and then your running pace. Now, these tests are quite easy to administer. They do require a little bit of forward planning in terms of where you're going to do them, especially for the biking one, because you're going to be biking pretty much full noise for half an hour, and you need that piece of road to be relatively flat, relatively low traffic, and low intersections and traffic lights, etc. Same too with the running, but obviously you're not going to be going as far, but you don't want to have any interruptions where possible. So what you're going to do is basically do a 10 to 15 minute warm-up, where it's just a nice gentle run or bike. Within that period, you want to include 3 or 4 sort of 1 minute accelerations. Now, when I talk about an acceleration, that would be sort of building up the intensity over the first 20 seconds. Maybe for that kind of middle 20 seconds, you're getting up to being working maximally and holding on for 10, 15 seconds at the end, and then dropping off. Don't obviously stop cold, just sort of slow your pedaling or your running down. Give yourself a minute or two in between and repeat another one just to really get your heart rate going and to get the blood flowing. Then at the end of that 10-15 minute period, you're going to start the lap timer on your watch or your cycle computer, and you're going to record a 30-minute block of work. Like I said, that's either biking as hard as you can or running as hard as you can for 30 minutes. Now, the key to doing this, when I say as hard as you can, is you don't want to sprint for 5 minutes and then just hold on. You want to be as consistent as you can across that 30 minutes, working at a hard level. So you kind of want to finish the 30 minutes being pretty stuffed, but not, like I said, getting to that final 10 just holding on. That ensures that your average heart rate or average power across that time is a really nice, stable, high level. So from there, you're going to take your average heart rate from that 30 minutes, or average running pace, or average bike power. And if you're using Training Peaks, you can input the average value on that the zone screen. There's a section there for running pace, for bike power, and also for heart rate. Now, when you go to calculate your zones from Training Peaks, especially using the heart rate, there's a drop-down list you're going to get to look at what different method to adopt. Now, Maddie is a preferent of the Andy Cogan method, which gives you 5 zones. I prefer the Joe Farrell for running or cycling, depending on what sport you've done, which gives you 7 zones. Now, we were just chatting before, I essentially use the 7 zones and drop them down to 5. So he'll give you zone 5, A, B, C. I just class that as 1, zone 5. So you get 5 zones, but it'll list out 7. Both methods have their merits and their downfalls, so they're both just as good as each other. Just depends on what sort of coaching method and background we're used to. Did you want to add anything to?
Yeah, I mean, the differences are so minute in terms of, it's just a couple of beats here or there, and they essentially do the same thing. The key thing is to do that personalised test. Using either one of those methods is going to give you so much of a better result than just going and doing your age predicted max, 220 minus your age and then finding percentages from there. So yeah, I mean there is literally no difference when it comes down to it. So either one of those would be the benchmark of quality.
Yeah, cool. And that's a great point that I missed out around the max heart rate. You can work out a heart rate zone based on a percentage of your max heart rate. To do a max heart rate test is tricky because you have to go essentially as hard as you possibly can for long enough to allow your heart rate to rise up to the peak, and you'll never quite know whether that was the peak. You might go out 2 weeks later in a race and you hit a higher level. So the threshold level seems to be a lot more reliable in terms of its retest kind of value.
So there's an article on the Exponential Performance Coaching website, which I'll put under the show notes for this episode. And what in that article, it shows like the gold standard of intensity gauges, which is like a lab-based anaerobic threshold test. And then it has a field test comparison, like what the heart rate zones came out of that field test. And then it has like where we looked at heart rate range, and then when we just looked at age predicted max heart rate and calculated zones off there. And you can see that compared to like the gold standard of a lab-based test, the field testing is super accurate, way more accurate than any of the other methods, and no cost in it either, which is one of the reasons that lab-based testing is one of the big negatives is the cost to get it done. It's upwards of sort of $150 depending on where you are and what sort of protocol you use. So have a look at that if you're interested in seeing the differences. But the number one thing I'd suggest is never ever just get your new Garmin, put your age into it, and then trust the training zones that they give you.
Yep, fantastic. But also, Garmin are going to give you some heart rate values, and Polar will give you some heart rate values for different zones. I think Strava even gives you zones. If you set up your zones on Training Peaks, that's your gold standard. You then need to be responsible for taking that data and putting it into Garmin, Polar, Strava, whatever it might be.
That's a good point.
So when you're using your device and it's telling you you're in zone 2, that's your threshold defined zone 2. It's not some random zone that Garmin has set up for you. So that would be my main kind of red flag around all this. The other thing is, obviously, I've talked a lot about the heart rate component. 99% of people are going to have access to setting a heart rate zone. A significant less proportion will use power. So if you want some information around power, where we can dive into that at a later stage. Running pace is similar. Running pace is an interesting kind of, I guess maybe a slightly newer field for zone testing. Heart rate is a wee bit easier to understand and get your head around without throwing pace into the mix.